This is you. You wake up on a reed mat, your back stiff against the packed mud floor. The air is thick with the smell of barley smoke, river silt, and animal sweat. You open your eyes and see a low ceiling of palm beams, and through a small square window, a sky so blue and so merciless it looks like the gods painted it that morning just to mock you. You try to remember who you are, but the memory is gone. You don't know your name. You don't know your century. All you know is that the body you're in is young, strong, and covered in a fine layer of yellow dust. And then you see her, a woman, maybe your mother, grinding grain on a flat stone in the corner. She looks at you with tired eyes and says one word in a language you've never heard but somehow understand. Get up. The fields are waiting. You stumble out of the hut into a maze of narrow alleys. Mud brick walls rise on every side, so tall they block the sun. Children run past you naked, chasing a three-legged dog. Men in wool skirts carry bundles of reeds, their skin burnt black. A donkey brays, a hammer strikes copper somewhere, and then you turn a corner and your breath stops. In the distance, rising above the flat plain like a mountain made by human hands, stands a stepped tower of white plastered brick, gleaming in the morning sun like a wound in the sky. A ziggurat. You realize where you are. You are in Uruk, the first great city of the world, and the year is somewhere near 3,000 years before the birth of a man who won't be born for another 3,000 years. A rough hand grabs your shoulder. An older man, his beard oiled into tight curls, his eyes sharp as obsidian. He calls you by a name you don't recognize, but your mouth answers to. He tells you that you're late, that the overseer is already at the canal, and that if you don't move faster, you'll be flogged in front of everyone. You follow him through the city gates, past guards holding copper-tipped spears. Outside the walls, the world opens up into the endless green of the irrigated fields. The land here is a miracle. On one side of the canal, cracked earth that would not grow a weed. On the other, barley so thick it looks like a golden sea. You understand that this water is the only thing standing between your people and extinction. You're handed a wooden hoe with a copper blade. The overseer, a fat man with a whip of braided leather, points at a clogged ditch and tells you to clear it by midday or lose a meal. You bend your back. The sun climbs, sweat pours into your eyes. Your palms blister, then bleed. Around you, dozens of men work in silence. One of them, a skinny boy with a cracked lip, whispers that the overseer is in a bad mood because the priest king is visiting the fields today. The other men's faces have gone pale. You keep digging. You learn without being told that in this world, silence is survival. At midday, a horn sounds from the top of the ziggurat. You are handed a flat round of barley bread and a cup of thick, sour beer. You drink it because everyone drinks it, and you realize this is the safest liquid they have. The river water kills people. The beer does not. You sit with the skinny boy under a date palm, and he tells you his name is Inanna, which means man of the moon. He tells you his father drowned in the marshes last spring, and now he works to pay off his father's debt to the temple. He tells you that in Uruk, no one is truly free. The temple owns the land. The king owns the temple. The gods own the king. He looks up at the ziggurat and says quietly that everyone here is paying a debt they did not take out. That afternoon, the priest king arrives. His name, they whisper, is Ensi. He rides in a wooden cart pulled by two wild donkeys, and behind him walk scribes carrying wet clay tablets. They press sharpened reeds into the clay, making tiny wedge-shaped marks, and you realize with a shock that you are watching the birth of writing itself. Every sack of grain, every worker in the field is being counted. Nothing escapes the tablets. The NC walks down the line of workers, and when he reaches you, he stops. His eyes are painted black with coal, and they look at you the way a butcher looks at a goat. He asks the overseer who you are. The overseer stammers out your name. The NC nods slowly, whispers to a scribe, and the scribe makes 3 marks on a tablet. Then he tells the overseer that tonight you are to be brought to the temple. By the look on Lunana's face, this is both an honor and a death sentence. The sun sets over the Euphrates in a blaze of copper and blood. You are washed in rose-scented water and dressed in a clean wool tunic. You are led up the long ramp of the ziggurat, step by step, past guards who do not blink. At the top, the white temple waits. Inside, the air is thick with burning cedar and the low hum of chanting priests. And there, on a platform of polished basalt, sits a statue of the goddess Inanna, her eyes made of lapis lazuli, her lips painted red with ochre. She stares at you across the millennia, and for a moment you forget to breathe. The Ensi approaches. He tells you that you have been chosen, not for sacrifice, but for something stranger. The scribes have watched you in the fields. They say the gods have marked your hands. You are to be trained as a scribe. You will learn the wedges. You will learn the numbers. You will learn to read the stars and to write the names of the gods. Most men in Uruk will spend their whole lives without ever learning a single mark on clay. You have just been handed the key to the only power that matters in this world, memory. Because in Sumer, a man who cannot be written about will be forgotten, and a man who can write can make sure he is remembered forever. The training is brutal. You wake before dawn and walk to the Aduba, the tablet house, where a master scribe with knuckles like river stones hits you across the fingers every time you make a crooked wedge. You learn 600 signs, then 1,000, then 2,000. Your head throbs every night. You dream in wedges. Slowly, the marks begin to speak. You read your first full line of text and the world tilts. It is a list of beer rations, dull and ordinary, but to you it is a miracle. Someone 50 years ago thought these words. He has been dead for decades, but through the clay he is whispering them to you. You understand what the priests mean when they say writing is a bridge thrown across time. The years pass like water through the canals. You rise through the ranks of the scribes, from the granary records to the temple accounts, and finally to the court of the Ensi himself. You marry a woman named Ninbanda, a weaver with a laugh like breaking pottery. Together you have 2 sons. You buy a small house with a courtyard and a single fig tree. At night you sit under that tree and watch the stars wheel overhead, and you think that you are happy. The amnesia of that first morning feels like a dream someone else had. But Uruk is not a peaceful city. It never was. One night a messenger arrives from the north, his sandals caked in blood and dust. The city of Kish is marching on you. Their king has decided that Uruk's grain belongs to him. The Ensi calls every able man to the walls. You are 40 years old. You have not held a weapon since you were a field worker. But they put a bronze-tipped spear in your hand and a leather helmet on your head, and they march you to the northern gate. Lunana, now a gray-haired veteran, stands beside you. He looks at you and says, without smiling, that the gods always collect their debts in the end. The battle is not what the poets will later describe. There is no glory. There is only dust and screaming and the wet sound of bronze breaking bone. You see Lunana go down with a spear through his throat before you even raise your own weapon. You stab a man in the stomach because he is stabbing at you, and his face, young and terrified, no older than your firstborn son, burns itself into your memory. He calls out for his mother in a dialect you half recognize. He dies slowly at your feet. Uruk wins the battle. The Ensi throws a feast, but you walk home with blood on your tunic and you lock yourself in your courtyard and you weep under the fig tree until the sun comes up. You live another 20 years. Your sons grow tall. One becomes a merchant who trades with the lands beyond the mountains. The other becomes a scribe, like you, and you teach him the wedges with your own hands. And when he reads his first full tablet aloud, you feel something in your chest that no battle could ever give you. Your wife grows old beside you. Her hair turns white. Her laugh grows quieter, but it never stops. You realize slowly that this life you woke into has become the only life you have. In place of the fear of the first morning, there is something heavier and softer, belonging. Then, one autumn, the fever comes. It moves through the city like a wind through dry reeds. The temples fill with mourners. The canals fill with bodies. Your wife is one of the first to fall. You hold her hand as she goes, and she squeezes your fingers once, and then her grip loosens, and you are alone in a room that suddenly feels too large. Your sons survive. You make them promise to leave the city, to take their families north to the hills where the air is cleaner. They beg you to come with them. You shake your head. You tell them that your bones belong to Uruk now. You watch their caravan disappear into the dust of the northern road, and you know you will not see them again in this life. In the final days, you walk to the top of the ziggurat alone. Your legs are slow, your breath comes hard, but you climb step by step the way you climbed the first night the NC summoned you 60 years ago. At the top, the city stretches out below you, endless and golden in the setting sun. The river curls through it like a living thing. You understand with a peace you did not expect that this city will outlive you by thousands of years, and then it will die too and be buried under the sand. But the marks on the clay will survive. Your name, written by your own son, will survive. Someone in a future so distant it is unimaginable will read it and wonder who you were. And in that moment, across the impossible gulf of time, you will be alive again for one breath. You lie down on the warm stones at the top of the temple. The sun touches the horizon. The evening wind moves through your thin white hair. You close your eyes, and just before the darkness takes you, you hear very faintly the sound of a woman grinding grain on a flat stone, and a voice you have not heard in 60 years. Gentler this time, almost kind, telling you that it is time. The fields are waiting.